Calvary Baptist Church of Willard welcomes you to an audio recording of a Bible message from our pastor. For more information about Jesus, the Bible, or our church, please visit our website at www.calvarywillard.org. Now on to today's message from the Bible.
Genesis 24, a marriage arranged by God. Have you ever met someone who had a mail-order bride? Apparently, it's common for women in developing countries to advertise themselves in developed countries as a potential wife. I have known several men who took advantage of this and were happy with the results. For most men, this would be an awkward way to find a wife. But with the rise of dating sites in the U.S., are we that far from doing the same thing? The truth is that many people struggle to find the ideal marriage partner. And when things don't work out, they wonder what they can do. Thankfully, God is interested in helping people with this problem, as we will see in our Bible passage today. We come to our first question. What does it say? I'd like to summarize what Genesis chapter 24 says. When Abraham was old and had been greatly blessed by the Lord, he sent his oldest servant to find a wife for Isaac. The woman was not to be from Canaan, but from his relatives in the old country. The servant asked what to do if the woman was not willing to come back with him. Abraham warned him not to take his son back to the old country, because God wanted him to stay in the promised land. If the woman was not willing to return, the servant would be released from his responsibility. When everything was understood, the servant agreed to do it. The servant took 10 camels and traveled to Mesopotamia, where Abraham's family lived. He prayed that God would give him success by showing him a specific sign. He asked that the woman who offered water for him and for his camels would be the one chosen by God. Before he had finished speaking, Rebekah showed up. She was a beautiful young woman who happened to be related to Abraham. When he asked her for a drink, she gave it to him and also offered to water his camels. When she said that, the servant wondered if this was the answer to his prayer. He gave her some golden jewelry and then asked who she was and if her family could provide lodging. When Rebekah told him who she was and that there was lodging available at her family's house, the servant bowed down and worshipped the Lord right then and there for leading him to Abraham's relatives. The woman ran home and told her family. When her brother Laban saw the jewelry and heard her story, he ran back to invite the servant to stay with them. The servant went to their house but was not willing to eat dinner until he had told his story. He introduced himself as Abraham's servant and explained the reason for his visit. He talked about how the Lord had blessed Abraham, how Isaac had been born to them when they were old, and that he had been sent to find a wife for him with specific instructions. He also told them about his prayer and how it had been answered. Rebekah had arrived while he was finishing his prayer, and things turned out just as he had asked. He then asked them how they would respond. Laban and Bethuel stated that what happened was from the Lord and that he could take Rebekah to be Isaac's wife. The servant worshipped the Lord and then gave gifts to Rebekah, her brother, and her mother. The next morning the servant asked for them to send him back to his master, but they insisted that Rebekah stay with them for 10 days before leaving. The servant insisted that they should not hinder him from completing his mission. So they asked Rebekah what she thought. She was willing to go. So they sent her with him and gave her their blessing. She and her maids rode on the camels and went back to Canaan with the man. Meanwhile, Isaac was living in the south and was coming back from Beer Lahai-roi. As he meditated in the field one evening, he looked up and saw the camels coming toward him. Rebekah also looked up and noticed him. She asked the servant who he was. When he told her that the man she was seeing was her future husband, she covered herself with a veil. Then they met Isaac, and the servant told him the whole story. Isaac took her as his wife and brought her into the tent his mother had used. He loved her, and his new relationship comforted him after the death of his mother. So that's what it says, which leads us to our second question. What does it mean? I'm going to give you about 5 different thoughts here. First, it was important where she came from. We see that in verses 2 and 3. To Abraham, where the woman came from was important. He insisted that his servant find a wife for Isaac from his own people instead of from Canaan. He was so concerned about this that he made the servant swear by the Lord God of heaven and earth. Why was this so important to him? Abraham didn't give a reason, he just made sure it wouldn't happen. But if Sodom and Gomorrah's wickedness is any indication of how the other people lived, there were probably not many God-fearing families in the area. He thought it better to find a godly wife for Isaac among his own relatives in the old country. In other places in the Bible, Deuteronomy 7, 3 and 4, 1 Kings 11, 4, Ezra chapter 9, and 1 Corinthians 7:39, God made it clear that an ungodly wife could turn a man away from the Lord. This happened when Solomon had all these extra wives that he married, and many other people were affected that way too. It makes sense that Abraham would be concerned that Isaac would have a godly wife, so that she could support his relationship with the Lord. He figured that finding a wife from his own country and family would provide someone who would already be a believer with good character. So it was important where she came from. The next thought is this. It was important to follow God's will. We see that in verses 5 through 8. The servant brought up a good question. He was being sent to a place 450 miles away. What if the woman was not willing to travel back with him? Should he take Isaac there to be married? Abraham was very clear that this should never happen. God had led Abraham and his family from the old country to Canaan and had been given the land. Because of that, Abraham insisted that the servant not take Isaac back to the old country. He believed that God would send an angel to accomplish this task. However, he also allowed that if the woman was unwilling to go with him, he would not be in trouble. God had originally commanded Abraham to leave his country, his family, and his house for the promised land in Genesis 12, 1 through 3. God promised to make his family become a nation, a great nation, to bless him and bless the whole earth through him. Abraham had obeyed God's command and had been living in the land for many years. Now, as he considered God's promise, he wanted to be sure that his son continued obeying God's will. A third thought. It was important to pray. We see that in verses 12 through 14. When the servant arrived in Mesopotamia, he prayed for success. As his caravan stopped near a well that evening, he prayed that God would specifically reveal the right woman as the one who would not only give him water to drink, but who would also offer to water his camels. As he was still speaking his prayer to God, Rebekah arrived with a pitcher on her shoulder. When she came back from the well, he ran over and asked her for a drink. She gave him water and then offered to water his camels. Praying for God's help was important to the servant. As he saw many young women walking toward the well, he knew that finding the right one for Isaac would be incredibly difficult. But he believed that God was able to give him the success he desired. So he asked God to give him a specific sign. This was not unusual for a believer to ask for a sign from God. Gideon, Hezekiah, Moses, Jonathan, and Zechariah all were given signs to bolster their faith in what God was going to do. If you'd like to look up those passages, they are as follows. Judges 6, 36 to 40, 2 Kings 20, verses 8 through 11, Exodus 4, 1 through 5, 1 Samuel 14, 8 through 10, and Luke 1, 18 to 20. Here's another thought. It was important to be patient. And we'll look at verse 21. It says, "And the man, wondering at her, remained silent so as to know whether the Lord had made his journey prosperous or not. Abraham had entrusted the choice to his servant with only a few requirements. She had to be from his family and had to be willing to return to Canaan. But I am sure that he was also looking for a woman with good character as well. A woman of good character would be an important help to Isaac and the raising of the next generation of believers in Canaan. So when he saw this beautiful young woman arrive with a water pot, he saw not only her beauty but also her work ethic. He quickly asked her for a drink of water. When she offered to water his camels as well, he stood quietly, wondering if she was God's answer to his prayer. It was important for him to watch and wait. He had just asked God to give him a sign, but he wanted to make sure that he wasn't reacting too quickly. She had fulfilled the sign he requested in prayer, but was she from Abraham's family, and would she be willing to return with him? Only time would tell. So he quietly watched as she kept going back to the well for more water. Another thought. It was important to talk with the family. Laban and the family had happily taken the servant and his caravan into their home. The camels were stabled and a meal was prepared, but the servant was unwilling to eat until he had told them his reason for visiting. He gave a speech about how the Lord had blessed his master, how a son had been born in their old age, and how he had inherited everything. This was the servant's way of showing that Isaac was financially ready to be married. He also explained the requirements given by Abraham. The woman had to be from his people and had to be willing to return with him. He then told how God had answered his prayer by Rebekah offering to water the camels. When he found out that she was from Abraham's people, he knew she must be the one God had prepared for Isaac. This was his way of showing the spiritual side of the situation. However, he still felt it was important to talk with the family. He spoke with Laban, her brother, and Bethuel, her father. In that society, having their blessing was important. That's why he didn't take her back when they first met at the well. Thankfully, the family saw God's hand in the events that had taken place. They were willing to submit to God's will in the matter. This agreement between the two families showed that this marriage proposal was a good thing. Our next thought. It was important that she was willing. We see that in verses 56 through 59. In a surprising twist to the story, the servant wanted to leave with Rebekah the next day. This seemed rather extreme to her family. Wouldn't it be better to give the family some time to say their goodbyes and get her ready to go? The family wanted 10 days, but the servant wanted to leave right then since God had answered his prayer. What were they to do? Laban and his mother decided that they would allow Rebekah to make her own decision. Was she willing to go right then, or would she wait? Her response is recorded in 3 words: I will go. This response from Rebekah was enough for the family. They sent her and her nurse on their journey with a blessing. You may wonder why it was important that Rebekah was willing. According to custom, marriages were often arranged and the couples were forced to learn to love each other instead of falling in love. But this family wisely included Rebekah's choice in the matter. And that made everything work much better. Our final thought. It was important that he loved her. You see that in Genesis 24, verse 67. I'll read that. It says, Then Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent, and he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. It was important that he loved her. When Isaac first saw the camels on the horizon, he must have wondered if the servant's trip had been successful. His veiled bride soon arrived, and the servant told him all that had happened. Isaac must have smiled as he heard the story. After all had been told, Isaac took Rebekah into the tent, that had been vacant for 3 years since his mother had died. And then I imagine the marriage was arranged and eventually took place, and he married her. But the one thing that is the most important in this verse is that Isaac loved her. Something about her beauty, about her character, about her personality caused Isaac to love Rebekah. This was an important part of their marriage. His choice to love her would help their marriage to work. Now our third question, how does it apply? First of all, marriage works best with godly people. Abraham wanted a godly wife for his son. That's why he was so insistent on his servant traveling far away to find her. They could have saved time by looking in Canaan, but finding a godly person was more important than convenience. The same thing should be true today. When a Christian is searching for a spouse, it might be more convenient to find someone locally who is not a Christian. But is that what God wants? In the New Testament, Paul said that a woman, quote, is at liberty to be married to whom she wishes only in the Lord. 1 Corinthians 7:39, unquote. In other words, a Christian should only marry someone who is also a Christian. Now, why is that? God has designed marriage to work best when both people are going in the same direction. When both are believers, this is a good first step. When both have good character, it works even better. When both are seeking to serve the Lord, their relationship will not only please the Lord, but produce children who are trained to do the same. This is why it is so important for a Christian to carefully choose whom he marries. A second thought. Marriage works best when the families approve. When the servant proposed the marriage of Rebekah to Isaac, he did his best to describe the situation as best as possible. The family had never met Isaac, didn't know his personality, and were probably wondering if such an unusual marriage could work. They heard about his financial situation. They heard about his family's relationship to the Lord, and they saw God's hand in answering the servant's prayer. When it came time to make a decision, they were willing to allow it. While it is important for the couple to be godly themselves, it sure helps if both of the families are also. Having parents and in-laws to support them in the future is very helpful. But it is important to listen to them before the marriage as well. Are they convinced that the marriage is a good idea? Do they have reservations or suggestions to consider before the wedding? Listening to the family's input beforehand can help the marriage to start off on the right foot. It can also hold back the couple, from making a poor decision. Our final thought is this: marriage works best by choice. From the beginning, this marriage was arranged by Isaac's father. The servant was employed to find a suitable wife, and permission was given by her father. But isn't it interesting that her family asked if she was willing to go with the man? In the end, her decision was what sealed the deal. And when she finally arrived, Isaac made the choice to love and marry her. While arranged marriages can work if two people choose to love each other, it seems better when the man and woman make the choice on their own. This is why most parents want their children to take time to get to know the other person before tying the knot. Through the engagement time, they get to know the other person and then are able to make an informed decision. That choice to love in sickness and health is very important. But always remember that the choice to love must continue throughout the marriage as well. Without it, things will fall apart. Our conclusion. The events narrated in Genesis 24 would make for a good Hallmark movie. The awkwardness of the arranged marriage, the hopeful prayer for God to give a sign, and the choice of both to love each other, in the end, makes all of us smile with appreciation for what God did for them. But is this just a chapter in the Bible for single people looking for a spouse? No, it's more than that. It's a reminder that God is actively involved in the lives of His people and that He wants to provide what is best for them as they seek Him first. So, Whether you are single or married, be a godly person for the Lord and trust Him as He works in your life.